You're listening to School Counseling Simplified, a podcast with easy-to-implement strategies for busy school counselors. Here's your host, Rachel Davis from Bright Futures Counseling.
Let's play a little game of Would You Rather, School Counselor Edition. Okay, would you rather spend your weekend planning a group or spend your afternoon sitting in irrelevant PD? Yikes. Or would you rather be the only counselor with no one to collaborate with, or to spend hours searching online for engaging activities? All of these options are pretty bad, right? But unfortunately, they're all too real. But what if I told you I had a solution for you? What if I told you I had access to hundreds of school counseling lessons, groups, and activities, counselor-specific trainings on the topics you need most, and a community of like-minded school counselors to support you? You would say, yes, please. Well, that is what Impact is all about. Impact is my monthly membership for school counselors, and it helps you with all of these things. You get access to hundreds of resources. That's unlimited free downloads. Log in and get what you need right away to every single resource that's in my store. We add new resources each and every month. We're adding a new middle school and elementary resource each month, and some of these are bonus Impact exclusives, meaning that you can get resources just for members. You can request resources that you need and easily search so you can find exactly what you're looking for. And let's talk about the trainings, counselor-specific trainings on the topics you need most. We do these each and every month as part of our Coffee with the Counselor series. Impact members get to join for absolutely free. You earn PD certificates and you get exclusive access to members-only things like the Ultimate Small Group Experience and our Summer Summit Conference. And the community. Y'all, this is possibly my favorite part of Impact. I so look forward to jumping on these calls, to getting to know counselors who are similar to me and also completely different. It's so fun to hear from your experiences and your challenges, and everyone brings a unique perspective to the table. We have an exclusive online community, and we even have a cool app where you can chat with other counselors in these community circles. We have our monthly calls, like I mentioned, twice a month, and we share wins, troubleshoot tough cases, and just talk about what it's like to be a counselor, because so often we're on our own island at our school sites. So if any of that sounds like it's for you, I would love to see you inside Impact. Go to stressfreeschoolcounseling.com/impact to solve all of your counselor problems. And I have a special offer for my listeners. Use code POD at checkout to save 10% off your first month. Okay, let's go to today's episode. You're listening to another episode of School Counseling Simplified. So today I want to share a little sneak peek of a special training with you. Now, as part of my Impact membership, we do monthly professional development trainings. Many times these are trainings from me, but a lot of times I like to use guests to come in. I love working with guest experts in different fields because we learn so much from them. So today, this is a training that was exclusive for my Impact members, just to give you a kind of a sample if you're ever curious what I'm talking about when I'm saying like, oh, monthly PD. This is what I'm talking about. So I'm going to share a little sample of this training so you can get a little taste of what's inside Impact. This training is with Joyce Harduvel from Balanced Mind Therapy and talking about unlocking the power of data. Okay, I hope you love it. Let's dive in.
Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Joyce Harduvel. I am a licensed clinical social worker and a certified school social work specialist. And I have 8 years of experience now working in schools, supporting students' social emotional learning and mental health. And the other thing about me is that I am a huge data nerd. It's in me. I always love math. It was always my favorite subject growing up, which it's funny that I ended up being going down the social work track, because we often don't leverage data in our field. And I feel like it's such a missed opportunity. When I think about data collection in schools, often it feels like a lot of work and no payoff. And I just really don't believe it needs to be that way. I think that data collection can be simple. And I also think that we can really leverage it to get amazing results for students. And so that's why I'm really excited to be here today talking with you about unlocking the power of data. There are obviously a million ways that schools can use data to support their services for students, but today we're going to be focusing specifically on individual students and how we can create positive change for them using data. So the first thing you're going to need to do, if you haven't done it already, right? If you have a kid in mind, you need to assess the situation, right? So we don't want to go in with our predetermined ideas of what the student needs, what their areas of weakness are. We might, of course, have hypotheses, and that's wonderful. But the beauty of data is we can get really, really specific on what is going on for that student. So if you are not sure where to start, maybe this is one of those kids who is just kind of all over the place and it feels like there are 5 million different concerns that you need to address, start with a holistic assessment. I'm not going to go too deep into all of these because, to my knowledge, none of these are free. I'm pretty sure that's accurate. But your district very, very likely contracts with Pearson or one of these other companies that allow you to administer these assessments. And it might be you as the counselor, it might be the social worker, it might be the school psychologist. In Chicago Public Schools, where I worked, did a lot of these for us. Anyways, whatever it is, these are good assessments to look into. And if you don't have access to any, maybe like advocating getting one of them, because it just gives you an overall picture of a child's functioning in many, many different domains. You also might be interested during your assessment process in getting some more targeted data. So during your assessment, right, you're looking at data, but you're also talking to people, talking to the child, talking to the family, talking to teachers, maybe doing an observation, doing a record review, all of these things. And you may uncover, for example, that there's some challenges around trauma emerging, right? And then you might use a more specific screener that's targeted. Obviously, there are like a bajillion different screeners depending on what a child's specific challenge is. And I'm going to list more specific ones later in this presentation. But these are just two examples. Like if you're seeing symptoms of PTSD, that might be relevant to assess for. The Bus Perry Aggression Questionnaire is another one that I like. Both of these are free. And you can use their evidence-based assessments to just sort of see what are the symptoms and what's the severity of the challenges that a student is facing. So once you've sort of gathered your idea, you probably have some sort of hypothesis as to what's going on, and your hypothesis is backed by some data. So then the next thing I would do is I would develop a goal that targets a lagging social emotional skill. And to me, nobody does this better than Castle. If you're not familiar with Castle, you have to check them out. They have so much research and so many resources for you. And it's like either all free or almost all free. So really, really highly recommend their work. Check it out. But basically, they have broken down social emotional skills into 5 different domains. And it can be tempting, right? Because the truth is these are all interrelated, and it's very likely that a child, especially a child with significant needs, they're probably having some challenges in multiple domains here. And that is normal. However, you got to pick a place to start. You can't do it all at once. So the different domains that you might think about in determining what area you want to focus on, it might be self-awareness, which is a child's ability to understand their emotions, their thoughts, their values, and the connection between those and their behavior. Self-management would be the child's ability to manage their emotions, manage their thoughts, manage their behaviors in different situations. This is also where like goal setting and achieving that goes into that category as well. A child who struggles with responsible decision-making, struggles with making caring and constructive choices about their personal behavior and social interactions, right? So this could be like school behaviors, academic behaviors. It could also be social behaviors. Then you have relationship skills, which is the ability to maintain and establish healthy and supportive relationships and to effectively navigate settings with diverse individuals and groups. And then the final one is social awareness, which is the abilities to understand the perspectives of and empathize with others, including people from diverse backgrounds, different cultures, different contexts than the child. So those are the different areas that you might think about targeting. And there are lots of more specific ideas of what a goal under one of these domains might look like at the Castle website that you could take a look at. But the reason why I say you want to develop a loose goal next is because you need to know what type of data you are going to be tracking. And you're not going to know what data to track until you know what you're trying to get the student to do, right? So, yeah, you could track attendance data, for example, but that might not be relevant to a kid who has a lot of aggression when they're at school, right? So you want to make sure that you're figuring out what data are actually going to be useful to you as you support this student. And step one to that would be figuring out what behaviors are we trying to change? What is the lagging skill that we are trying to address? So once we sort of have our idea of exactly what we are going to address, then we can establish a baseline through data. So there's data that you can collect from the classroom. Some of these, you might be the person collecting it. Some of it, you might be relying on a teacher or a teacher's assistant or someone else in the building to collect it for you. The Woodcock and the Boss are two standardized assessments for observing students in the classroom. I don't know if this is legal or not, but I found them both for free online, and you can too. I hope it's open source and I didn't just steal something, but they're definitely widely available online. Those are good options, and they're easy, right? Because both of them you could do in like 10 to 20 minutes of just popping into the classroom, you're filling out the form. The Boss at least also has an app that you can use. So that's one option. There's also data that you can collect just based off of the student records without anyone needing to do anything extra, right? Because there's already going to be data about what assignments students aren't completing. And that might be useful information, especially let's say if you have a responsible decision-making goal. So like missing work, that could be something you could choose to collect data on GPA or the numbers of D's and F's that a student has, attendance data, all of that will be in your student management system accessible to you already. So that's kind of nice. I would argue that we really don't want to rely just on those types of data simply because there are just so many variables, right? So like there are certainly things that you might, for example, like let's pick responsible decision making. There might be things that a student needs to improve on in the domain of responsible decision making to make sure that they're getting to school every day and on time. However, there also might be a million other factors that you have no control over, right? And so I'm not saying don't track attendance data. However, I'm saying that should probably not be the only data that you are tracking because you really don't have full control over the variables that go into producing a student's attendance rate. And then the last ones are just different ways of looking at behavior. These are all ones that sort of require someone to be in the classroom for an extended period of time. So you would not be performing these ones. You would need buy-in from a teacher or from some adult who's willing to be in the classroom on a regular basis to collect these data. And there are forms you can use to make it really, really easy and a low lift for them. And then you can analyze the data. So I love antecedent behavior consequence tracking. I've created forms you can also find online, free forms that just sort of, checkbox type situations where the teacher can fill out what happened before the behavior, what was the behavior, some characteristics of it, and then like what the consequence was. That's really great, especially if you're doing a functional behavior assessment or a behavior intervention plan. That's important to have. And then depending on what the behavior is that you're looking at, assuming, again, this is all assuming that it's an externalizing behavior, a behavior that you can see. For example, if a child's goal is going to be something like self-esteem, I'm trying to think if any of this classroom data might be relevant. Potentially work completion, right? Because sometimes we know our students don't turn stuff in for fear of doing poorly on it. Like they'd rather just not do it at all than do poorly on it. But often those internalizing behaviors, the other options that we're going to talk about in a minute, are going to be better. But in terms of externalizing behaviors, depending on the behavior, different behavior tracking methods are going to be better. So like frequency is super easy. That is just a tally mark, or like I've seen teachers have those. It's like what someone would use to count people coming into like a stadium or something like that, a little clicker thing that just counts, and they can just count how many times a student gets out of their chair, for example. So that's one type of data that could be collected. Then there's latency tracking, which is like how long, maybe this is a kid who has really difficult time initiating tasks. So then you're tracking, okay, the teacher said to, gave the instructions and said to start at, 8:32, and it was 8:37 when the student actually began working on the assignment. So that would be like latency tracking. Then there's also duration tracking. Like, I don't know, if the kid is eloping and going to the bathroom, how long are they spending in the bathroom? Or like if they're throwing wild tantrums, how long is that tantrum lasting? That would be duration data. And then interval data can be really interesting. It's like how many intervals of the day a student is engaging in the behavior. But also you could even map out the day and have like a grid type of situation where there are different squares for different times. And you're just sort of like filling in, okay, these are the squares where it happened. And then you can start to see some patterns emerge, like what is happening more, in the morning versus in the afternoon. Maybe like a certain class period seems to be a trigger, whatever. All of those can be helpful ways to gather data about behavior. Those are all, everything we just talked about, those are all things that are collecting data for how a child presents in the classroom. Then if you're going to want to do some more internal behavior, mood, mental health, that type of data, then you're going to use some other options. So, although one of these, the first one is like more of an externalizing behavior, and that's in-session behavior tracking, right? So like, oh man, I had this one little guy and he really, really struggled with losing games. He did not want to lose a game. And so he would cheat. And also, like, if he was losing, he would, like, I don't know, like mess up all the cards, or he would like take a card from another kid, or whatever the case may be. So like I could track how many times per session he did that to see, okay, with these interventions, with these distress tolerance skills that I'm teaching him, is that behavior going down over time? Are my interventions actually being effective? So that's another way you could track the in-session behavior. I would argue that it's really good to do this if you possibly can, simply because then you're not relying on someone else to collect the data. Mood tracker is another great one. And I was just talking to one of my supervisees, who's a school social worker, and she was saying she is like using these mandala mood trackers, right? So it's like and I'm sure you can buy it online, or maybe it's free to print out or something like that, but it's like a adult coloring sheet. And then like each little part of the mandala is a different day. And then the child fills in the color, right, based on how they're feeling. So it's fun, and it's pretty, and like, maybe an art therapy project, but it's also tracking their mood and giving you data. So you could do something like that. You could also do just asking them how they're feeling and just making sure that you're keeping a note of that. I've even seen people have a child fill something out for like every period of the day. How did you feel during that period? And they have to write it down, and then that becomes useful data. You could also create your own, or maybe like if you're using a standardized program, it comes with something like this, but an easy SEL skills or knowledge pre and post test. So like, okay, I want, like with one of the goals that I'm going to show you a little later that I wrote, maybe you want the child to understand the connection between thoughts, behaviors, and emotions, right? That cognitive triangle. And then maybe you also want them later to be able to identify what, examples like, okay, that's a thought, that's a behavior, that's an emotion. And then maybe you also want them to figure out how they're connected. And then maybe you also want them to be able to figure out like, okay, if I change the thought, right? If I change my automatic thought to a more helpful thought, then it changes the emotions and behavior. So you could have like a screener that's questions like, changing your thoughts can change your behavior, yes or no? Things like that, right? So you could create your own pre and post test to see what knowledge they gain. You could also see what skills they gain. Like, can you name 5 healthy coping mechanisms that you would enjoy participating in, right? Maybe at the beginning they can't name 5. By the end of working with you, they can name 5. So that's another way to do it. Another thing you could do is doing a standardized screener pre and post test. So A lot of these, like for example, something like the Vineland is probably not going to change drastically over time. However, the child PTSD scale might change over time, should change over time if you're trying to intervene in that area, right? And so you could do a pre and post test with that one, or with, really whatever screeners your school is using. You could also look specifically at mental health symptoms. So the Beck Youth Inventory is a great one. These are just like some more screeners I wanted you to be knowledgeable about. The RCADS is a good one for anxiety and depression. Scared is good for it gets into like specific anxiety related disorders, and like all different OCD and specific phobias and all different kinds of things are symptoms are tracked by the Scared. You could also just do like an ADHD rating scale based on the DSM that's out there. And there are others. I would encourage you to not make up your own unless it's like an SEL skills or knowledge pre and post test, simply because it's better to use one that is validated by data that we know, right? Like you can run it and say like, okay, this is statistically significant that they're at this level versus this level. Like that is important because, a score of a 22 out of 25 might mean something versus a 20. But that might also not be a statistically significant difference, right, in those two scores. And so we don't want to get hung up on like, oh, look, the student regressed. And it's like, no, they're in the same score band. It's actually not statistically significant. So sorry if I like made your brain spin if you're really not a math person, but basically when you're using a screener that is validated by the data, it will tell you exactly how to score it and what your score means. So you're sure that you're being accurate in what you're communicating about a child, versus if you like make up a screener on your own and you're like, oh, they clearly have really bad anxiety because I said so, basically, right? Like we prefer to use this stuff that's validated by the data. So, okay, establishing a baseline. These are lots of options. You do not have to do all of them, obviously. I would encourage you to choose at least one, bare minimum. You could maybe do two, right? So like you might want one that's like classroom data, you might want, and then one that's like, in session, something like a mood tracker or something like that. But don't go crazy. You don't feel like you have to do a ton of stuff. And then once you have that baseline data, you can refine your goal and make sure that it is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time limited. I'm not going to go into it what a SMART goal is because I'm sure you already know. And if you don't know, it is beyond easy to Google a little how do I write a SMART goal? But you probably already teach your kids how to do this. So I'm not going to patronize you by making you sit through a lecture on how to do it. So for sure at the beginning, okay, so we know self-awareness is what we want to work on, but now that we have some data, we can figure out what is the child functioning at now, where do we want them to be functioning at, and how do we get them there? Choose a strategic starting point, right? Remember what I said before that kids, some of them come to us with so many challenges and it's really hard, and I get it. Pick one thing. Like the thing that I will ask parents and teachers is like, if you could only change one thing about this child's behavior, what would you choose and why, right? And then they'll usually come up with some really good reasons as to like, okay, well, we think that this is causing these other behaviors, or, this one is really the one that's the most disruptive. And if we had this under control, it wouldn't be creating such an issue in the classroom, or whatever the case may be. So think about like where to start, and remember that that's not the ending point, right? Hopefully this child is going to meet their goals and keep pushing past them, and you're going to continue setting new goals and building new skills for them. But you got to pick one place to start, not a million different goals, one goal. Also, you want to focus on what you can control. Like, oh my goodness, like I understand that attendance is important, but all of these attendance goals that I've seen written for like 4-year-old kids, when we can't really, we can incentivize the parents, we can make sure they understand how important attendance is, but these like chronic truancy cases with very young children, the child has no control over that, right? So like, what is something that you can actually control? And what can you actually make a difference in terms of helping a child achieve a new level of skill or understanding or whatever. So focusing on what you can control. And then the other thing I want to say is I personally think it's best practice to break down your goal into benchmarks. So like, okay, this month or this quarter or whatever, what are we going to work on with this student? We have this overarching goal. What are the benchmarks? I would recommend benchmarks that are like first having this child learn the skill, learn what it is, then have them practice it. And then the third one, have them generalize it, right? So to give you an example, like they might learn anchor coping strategies, they might practice them in session with you, and then they might practice generalizing it in a group setting or in the classroom or whatever. So the reason why having a SMART goal is important is like all of the reasons why goal setting is important that you already know, and making sure that we are directing our work with students, but also because it can be another source of data for us. So that brings us to progress monitoring. Too many times I see people assess a student and they collect all these data and then they don't return to it ever again, or for a year when the student is being reassessed and they're writing a new IEP or whatever the case may be, or something really bad happens and now we're looking back at the data. Like, data are not effective if we are not using them all the time. So how we do that is through progress monitoring. So when it comes to the screeners, if you're choosing to use a screener, you need to decide, do we want to do a pre and post test, right? So maybe you have a 6-week intervention, you want to do a pre-test and a post-test, or maybe it's like a year-long thing and you'll do one at the beginning of the year and end of the year, or a semester-long, whatever the case may be. That's one option. You could also do it more frequently. If it's something, right, some things change a lot over time. Hopefully, if an intervention is effective, like for example, those PTSD symptoms, it's going to ask the child in the last 2 weeks what they've experienced. And we're hoping that that changes more rapidly than like over the course of an entire year. However, things like the SSIS, those scores are not going to change in a month. Sorry, they're not. They just aren't. So you could do it more frequently depending on what the progress monitoring tool is, which screener you're talking about. Another one is classroom data. So you might decide you want interval data or you want antecedent behavior consequence data all the time. The teacher needs to always be collecting that on the student, or their paraprofessional or whoever needs to always be collecting it. That would be ongoing data collection. Or it could be like you're going to pop in and do an observation once a month and you're going to fill out the BOSS and then you're going to use that as data. Or you're going to ask the teacher once a month to, collect, say, interval data for one day or something like that. So those are sort of your options for progress monitoring using classroom data. And then as far as the in-session stuff that's not a screener, you can measure that using your case notes. So you want to align your case notes to your goals that you've set. So here's one example goal that I wrote that I believe is SMART. I did take out some details of it just for, length purposes, right? Because I would have said that like the student will do this in counseling sessions and how it will be measured and things like that. But the sort of meat of it is that the student will demonstrate understanding of the connection between thoughts, feelings, and behavior. That's the cognitive triangle, applying it to real world examples in 4 out of 5 attempts. So if that's my goal and I want to track progress towards that goal and use data intentionally, I might write my progress note as, given example scenarios, the student accurately identified the components of the cognitive triangle and their relationship in 3 out of 5 attempts, right? And then I write that down, 3 out of 5 on October 1st, whatever it is. And that now is a piece of actually quantitative data. It's not just like, right, too many people are like, well, I feel like the student is progressing, or like looking at, my loosey-goosey progress notes, it seems like they're getting better. No, we want like actual data that we could look at, that we could even put on a graph if we wanted to. And so that's one example of a measurable case note. Here's another example for you. The goal is the student will ask a peer follow-up questions during therapy group conversation in 3 out of 5 opportunities, given scaffolded supports. Progress note could be, while using conversation cards in a small group, student asks peers follow-up questions per provided modeling in 3 out of 5 opportunities. So 3 out of 5, they met it. Good job. We're writing that down. Then that could go in like a Google sheet. That could just go in a notebook that you're writing things down, whatever the case may be. And that becomes progress monitoring data rather than just a note documenting the fact that you had a session. And now, please use the data, right? So this is sort of my plea at the beginning, like, what is the point of doing all this work if you are not going to actually use it? And I think that this is why people don't really like data collection, because they see it as just like something to do, that like they have to do it because someone's telling them they have to like do this screen or whatever, and then they never look at it again. And so it's not useful. So then, yeah, it is a waste of your time, but it doesn't have to be. And these are the ways that you can make it not a waste of your time. If a child is not making progress based on the data that you're collecting, probably time to adjust your goal. You're maybe not targeting the right behavior. You maybe need to step back and target something a little bit simpler or more foundational. Or it might just be like totally misaligned to what the kid needs, or maybe the kid meets the goal. Like let's think positive too. Like maybe the kid meets the goal really, really fast, and now you need a new goal, because what's the point of working on a goal that they've already met? It can also help you target your interventions, right? So if you're noticing certain things, like, maybe the student, let's see, you're seeing like particular antecedents in the antecedent behavior consequence tracker that seem to be triggering a worse reaction in students, then okay, how can we change that antecedent? Can we eliminate it from the environment? Or like, do we need to work on helping the student cope? Because maybe the antecedent is just like being given a task. Like maybe there's not a whole lot we can do to prevent that from happening, right? Where at school, you're gonna have to do tasks, but maybe there's something else that you can do instead to target your intervention to better fit the student's needs and where exactly they are struggling. You could also use it to advocate for student needs. Like, hey, my student needs a one-to-one paraprofessional. They clearly need support. Here's all the data that shows that you need support. You need to support the student more than they are getting right now. That's another way you can use data. Also, have the kid track their own data, right? So like maybe with, how did you do today at following directions in our social work session or school counseling session? Like, and then maybe you come up with a rating, the kid comes up with a rating, you have a conversation, especially if they are disparate scores, and then you track them. You could even like bring in some math skills and like plot them. Right? And create a little scatter plot or a bar graph or whatever. Bring the kid in and have them be accountable for their own data and their own progress. Also, if a kid is like, their data looks really great, celebrate them. Let them know that their data looks really great. Let their families know. Share out data, good or bad, right? To help people understand what supports the child needs, or help them celebrate the child, or whatever the case may be. Share that data out. Also big on using data to visualize, right? Because it's one thing to say Johnny is really struggling with, social cues, and quite another to show like, okay, here's a graph of how many times a day Johnny is getting himself into an altercation because he's not understanding, the stop cues that he's getting from other kids. Like his behavior is inappropriate and he's not picking up on that. And here's how it's impacting his day. Here's how often it's happening. And like, not just telling that, but actually showing the picture that really tells the story. That can be incredibly powerful. And then the last one I wanted you to think about, and like, obviously there are lots of ways to use data when you're thinking about whole school stuff. So like needs assessments and things like that. But also as you collect data for your caseload, you might start noticing trends that might make you think bigger than individual students. Maybe certain classrooms are across the board having a certain issue, or maybe across the school, you're noticing that after lunch, there's a spike in behavioral issues, right? So then that can help you figure out like what school-wide changes do we need to make to support like tier 1, support all of our students, because this is not just a Johnny issue. This is actually a wider spread issue that we need to be working on. And I promise you, if you follow these recommendations, right? So you do an assessment, you choose what data it's going to be realistic for you to collect on a regular basis, and you figure out like what is your schedule for collecting that data, who's responsible, how is it being collected, who is compiling it, probably you, and just like making it as easy as possible. And then you actually do it. And then you set aside, like I set aside time once a month to review my data, right? And then write like a little, okay, now that can go to maybe the teacher and the parent, like a little note, like, hey, here's a little review of the data from this month. It will help you because it will decrease the challenges you're seeing with students, because your interventions will be so much more effective when they are data driven and you can see exactly where the gaps are and what you need to do differently. Plus makes you look like you know what you're talking about, and like it makes it harder for people to argue with you when they're like have a totally different theory of what's going on, and you can say like, no, the data actually show that the issue is not just that Susie is a brat. The issue is that Susie really is struggling with these transitions from class to class, and we see the data supporting this. So I would really encourage you to get a little excited about how you can use data to actually make your life easier. I swear if you use it well, it will actually save you time. It does not have to be this big, annoying thing that you have to do. So that is my hope for you, that you are able to see data in a positive, helpful light. But I just wanted to say thank you so much. I hope that this is helpful. I hope this gave you something that you can go back to your school and implement tomorrow. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share this information with you. I'm on Instagram at Joyce LCSW, one word. And my website is joyce-lcsw.com. So there are lots of ways that I would love to connect with you if you are interested in continuing this conversation over on Instagram, or like I send out emails. Just hit me up. I would love to chat further with you about using data to improve your interventions for students in schools.
Thanks for listening to School Counseling Simplified. You can find the links from today's episode in the show notes. If you'd like to connect with Rachel, she's on Instagram and Teachers Pay Teachers at Bright Futures Counseling. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes of School Counseling Simplified. Talk to you next week.